Today's guest is Kane Jackson, the innovative co-founder and CEO of Maslow. From starting and selling a cleaning business in his teens, Kane transitioned into the finance sector with a unique perspective gained from his time as a paramedic. This experience revealed the results of a broken system and inspired him to tackle the challenge of transforming the finance world. His mission? To create financial equality for humanity. This is The Mucky Middle. Thank you for joining us at The Mucky Middle. You are the co-founder and CEO of Maslow. Before we jump into kind of how you're disrupting the finance sector, tell us a little bit about what is your origin story? How did you sort of... what was your dream when you wanted to be? What did you want to be when you were a kid?
When I wanted to be a kid, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a truck.
A truck.
That was my first dream at age 3.
Yeah.
I was pretty disappointed to learn that I couldn't be one. After that, it took me a really long time to have any idea what I wanted to do, and that experience pretty much followed me all the way through primary, secondary, and then the first sort of few years of university. My first degree was psych, and I love working with people. I love growth and helping people, but psych was sort of not really something I wanted to do full time and for the rest of my career. So I ended up doing a paramedic degree, which I absolutely loved. Problem for me was it was a guideline driven profession, and I like to sort of break rules more than sort of follow them. And, I think I'm always looking for creative ways to solve existing problems rather than sort of apply known solutions to things. And I found that that work was pretty repetitive, but also frustrating because paramedics are, band-aids to some pretty big systemic problems. So I ended up, after that, I started a law degree and absolutely hated that. But all the way through, I'd been starting businesses. So I started my first business when I was 14. So it was a cleaning company. So I ended up, started cleaning. My dad ran a panel shop and they needed a cleaner. So he said, you need an ABN. So I set up an ABN and off I went from there, and I ended up, cleaning cinemas and offices and all sorts of things, and actually sold that company just a couple months after my 18th birthday. And then, there was all types of businesses, probably seven or eight businesses from sort of then onwards. And I was always doing something while studying. And again, still not knowing where I wanted to go. I'd finished my paramedic degree. I was halfway through my law degree. And I said, look, I want to break down some barriers for sophisticated investors. I'd learned a bit about trading through a friend of mine. His dad was a stockbroker. So I got into the world of fintech, trying to break down barriers that exist between sophisticated and retail investors. And I'm still in that space. Not that I don't know that I ever wanted to be here. I don't know that I certainly don't want to be here. But, it's... there's some pretty big problems, and I guess if you look at the common themes, I get really drawn towards unfairness and injustice, and the finance industry is probably emblematic of some of the problems I was seeing on road as a paramedic as well, and that's why we're here. I think we can solve some big problems here. And
Kane, so when you say that you're seeing the outcomes of some of these problems, what do you mean?
It's really hard. Being a paramedic's changing a lot, and it has. I finished in 2014 at uni, and it was on the cusp of the government deciding that they were going to start paying paramedics much better than they had previously. It used to be a diploma qualification, then it was a university degree, so it's a much higher standard now. They deliver a much higher level of care, but also the paramedics are who you call when you've got no one else to call. If you think about you've got no family, you need help, whatever the help might be, and help can change. Help can be, I have dropped something and I can't pick it up. I'm an elderly person. I don't know how to get to the doctor, and I don't have any money to do that. There is no one else in our society to call. You can call 000 and you can tell the person on the phone that you've hurt yourself, and they will send someone. And so we were going to, we say one of my co-founders is also a paramedic. And we say that about 50% of patients that call an ambulance don't actually need one. That's because, they're at that point in society where they either don't have, a support network around them, or they don't know who else to call. And you see a lot of that. So you see a lot of low socioeconomic sort of lived experiences, a lot of crime, a lot of drugs, a huge amount of domestic violence, where you get a phone call and someone's, created a story about why they need a paramedic, but that's not why you're there. So you're also doing detective work and all sorts of things like that. But you see all of, I guess, the end results of inequality, of social injustice, financial injustice, and then you are expected to solve it. And our society is not built to solve all of those problems at that point with that tool. And so you end up transferring patients to hospital that don't need to go to hospital, but it's like, well, hey, how else am I going to get this person help?
Yeah, and sometimes they just need to get out of that house, or
they just need someone to care. They haven't eaten properly for 3 weeks, or and we saw a lot of that. And you think if you had anyone in your life that could help you, or there was someone else, then you wouldn't need us right now. And that's like being a paramedic is you're sort of triaging society's problems a lot of the time. And don't get me wrong, obviously there's a huge medical and emergency need for paramedics, but there's they see the brunt of the problems that no one else knows how to solve.
Interesting. So into Maslow trying to solve the underlying issues with some of these problems that you saw.
Yeah, so Caitlin and I talk about how we think about 50% of these patients wouldn't exist in the health system if they were part of a fairer economic system. Now, when I first entered the finance industry in 2014, I went in with no idea how the finance industry operated. And we launched one of a very unique product that no one had launched before. Everyone said we wouldn't be able to do it, and part of that process was learning about the finance industry. And I learned that it was, quite frankly, it's fucked. The finance industry is an industry that's gated by highly educated individuals who have a vested interest in making as much money as possible from people who don't understand products they're buying. And that's pretty much the state of play. And, there's a huge portion of our population that doesn't get too harmed by the finance industry because they're middle class and above, or they're working class. There's a lot of people in the working class that have more money than the middle class at the moment. But they've got the money to get advice. They've got the money to seek out resources. They're not under financial stress. Your IQ drops 13 points when you're under financial stress, and so you're in that position where you're making bad decisions. And the industry offers more expensive products to the people who can least afford them. So it creates a feedback loop. And one of the things that you see in a massive focus on preventative healthcare policy when I was at uni, and if you look at preventative medicine or healthcare policy, it's all about proactiveness, right? And proactiveness is predicated on having enough money to get something sorted before it snowballs, right? And whether it's a sore ankle, a cough that turns into a chest infection, that turns into pneumonia, whatever it is, if you have the ability to be proactive, you solve the problem. And we talk about proactive healthcare policy as being cheaper than reactive. And this is why we're trying to get smokers down. We're trying to, all these sorts of things. There's a lot of commonality, a lot of crossover with the people who experience the worst parts of the finance industry and have the hardest time in life. And so coming back to what I said earlier about being a Band-Aid as a paramedic, I hated that. And so we look at going upstream. And, we think that if we can change the operating system of the finance industry, we can probably affect more positive social impact than anything else has before. It's a pretty ambitious goal. And it's an interesting approach. We say we bring a healthcare perspective to finance, but we don't just want people who are struggling to benefit. The finance industry has trebled so it's actually grown more than that. It's gone from 8.3% of GDP in 1983 to 25% of GDP today. And there's no evidence to suggest that the growth of the finance industry has grown the broader economy. Plenty of evidence to suggest that it extracts rent from it. And so we believe that if we can empower the finance industry to be a tool for humanity's benefit, collective benefit, then we can remove a significant part of that extractive nature from that part of our economy, and that would fundamentally change the way society operates.
Awesome. We talk a lot about how money can be a force of good with one of our, superannuation clients, but it's interesting how you're tackling it as quite a holistic You're not taking one little piece, you're looking at it as... Can you just describe the vision of Maslow?
Yeah, so we say we want to build a finance... So we're building a finance industry for humanity. At the moment, the finance industry is owned through people who own shares in listed companies and whatnot by about 4 or 5% of the population. So 4 or 5% of the world own the world's largest industry. Now, the finance industry is the world's largest industry. It serves 78% of all people have a financial product. 74% have access to clean drinking water. So that gives you some idea about the size of the finance industry. But if you think about some of the characteristics of the finance industry, it's unique. There is no other industry like it. First and foremost, it is an industry that overlays a system. So the finance industry overlays the finance system. Now, we all have to use the finance system, but it's an industry that runs in conflict with its customers. So it's the only industry in the world, the only type of business that sells the exact same thing its shareholders want. So the finance industry, everything they sell is money. So insurance is less expense later on for a fee up front or along the way. Investing is more money later for a fee along the way, hopefully. A loan is more money, or is money now for a fee over time. Everything we sell in the finance industry is selling money. And the only way that you can give more return to your shareholders is to give less to your customers. Every other industry has a medium of exchange. You know, whether you're selling coffee, you can toy with the economics of that. You can deliver better quality coffee. You can lower your expenses. You can deliver a greater customer experience and make more money. You actually can't do that in the finance industry. So we have this very unusual industry, and you know, we talk about shareholder primacy a lot in the impact space. And if we have a look at you know, directors' obligations, who, you know, directors for these at these finance companies, the boards, they have a legal obligation, a fiduciary duty to deliver a return as much as they can to their shareholders. So legally, they have to extract as much money as possible from their customers. So we've got 4% of the world who owns these companies, extracting from 78% of the world. And so we look at the financial industry being, because it is the biggest one, it touches more people than any other industry, it's the biggest lever that we can pull. And so if we talk about, you know, the zeitgeist now supports so many progressive policies. It recognises so many minorities that weren't recognised 40, 50 years ago, right? Our understanding of fairness has evolved so much socially, and yet we don't have the economic systems to support that. Unless we change the finance industry, we can't have them. And so that's what we're doing.
So you're tackling the whole industry.
We would like to build a new finance industry for the world and then give it to them. People get uncomfortable when we talk about, hey, you're going to build a new finance system. How do you do that? And firstly, it's wildly...
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah. You know, firstly, it's wildly difficult and highly unlikely. You know, we talk about to our investors, to the market, we are so much more likely to fail than succeed. And, you know, everyone in our sort of circle knows that, but we've got to try. So we say, look, the finance industry still needs to have, you know, regulators involved. It still needs to have governments involved. But instead of it being owned by 4% of the population, let's see if we can have it be owned by more. And instead of it being centralized, can everyone have a share in the finance industry? And sure, the government still needs to be able to control currency and all those sorts of things. But at the moment, we're extracting from all these people. So can we just change it so that it's no longer a tool for extraction? You can still use it as a tool to administer life.
Yep.
And we all need to. And this is why I say we have to use the finance system. We all have to. We're forced to.
Yep.
It is a tool to administer life. You know, you cannot live in 2024 without using the finance system.
So what is step one? Is it a bank? Like, is
Yeah,
it like product based
so
first? So you go through insurance and you have lots of different products.
So it starts with banking.
Starts with banking.
Yeah. So we've signed a partnership with a bank.
Yep.
We don't yet have enough money to deploy that product.
Yep.
Raising money for a social impact startup is incredibly difficult. We have some unique characteristics within our structure. One of them is we have a cap on potential returns that our investors can earn. It's pretty high at the moment. It'll get lower and lower over time as we move through rounds. It's 200x, right? And what we've done there is a compromise. And people on the far left of the social impact side hate us because it's too greedy. And people on the far right of the sort of capitalist scale will say, why have you got a cap on investment returns? I'm not going to invest in you. So it's a compromise. We say, look, capitalism is the best of a bunch of bad systems. And look, I think it's the best system because it speaks into our underlying drive as humans to accumulate and have more in the future than we have now. Whether that's firewood for winter or money in the bank, we all tend to have that innate, it's a survival mechanism. We, and anyone that fights against that in an economic system is really, really in trouble.
We've built a lot of purpose-driven brands, and we always focus, what is in it for me as the customer.
Absolutely.
And, what am I buying this product? Is it best in class? And it also does a great job for the planet. Those things are secondary generally, because if it's awesome for the planet, but it's not actually going to give you a great return, no one's going to use it.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And, we saw that in the early days of the environmental push and the green tax. And it was like, if you could afford it, you would pay more for, sustainable products. But if you couldn't, it was like, well, I can't afford that.
Yeah.
And only when the price comes down did we start to see that shift.
Yep.
And, hopefully that will happen more and more. But the focus for us, so it starts in banking. And the reason for that is you've got to have a daily relationship with your customer. It's really simple. Then it goes into our value add products. Banking's not a value add product because there's very little wrong with the banking business model. At the moment, it does it's very good in Australia. Yes, the banks make a lot of money, but it's because they're so consolidated. But then it gets into insurance and the way we sell complementary financial products. So the easiest way to describe that is Costco. So you pay a membership fee, which is a monthly subscription fee in our case. You get access to banking like you would at UpBank. And then we start adding in these value add products like insurance, lending products, investment products, and all of them, much like Costco, they don't have profit margin on them. So they're sold at cost price. Now, Costco used to be the cost company, which is where the name came from, and they used to sell things at cost price. Now they add a 25% margin on, and that's sort of got larger over time. So we have a policy that will never add a margin. So you pay your monthly fee and you get access to cost price financial products. And that fundamentally changes that core conflict issue we spoke about before, where we as a provider would otherwise be incentivized to make more profit by carving out the products. So if we look at financial products, they exist within a feedback loop of decay. They're getting worse and worse because the motivations or the incentives of companies that are carve out more and more to make more profit. Every year, if one financial company doesn't make as much as the other one, shareholders will invest in that one.
Yep.
And so the standard market forces at play are to reduce the quality of financial products. And we're seeing that, and we're seeing that with all sorts of things, people not being able to reinsure their houses depending on where they are and things like that. So the notion starts off building basically white labeling products and not adding the profit margin.
Yep.
And that's no different to the way budget insurers operate. Yep. They just add less margin and run really lean.
Just have a brand on top.
Absolutely. The problem that's existed in the space before is the industry is really siloed, and it's because they're all trying to extract profit from selling a product. If you change that model, right? So replace the existing model with a new one where you never extract or earn revenue from the financial product itself, and you charge for a service, you end up looking something more like Netflix. Netflix has to pay for the content they create or they license. And you don't pay any extra for it. It's all in the monthly fee. But you can choose what you want. And Netflix has no incentive to push you towards any one or the other.
We can see Apple's doing that at the moment with their kind of ecosystem of the exercise, and you can basically have
package
one
up.
license for the whole thing.
Absolutely. And it's all about changing or aligning the incentives of the provider so at the moment we've got this feedback loop of decay. Can we flip that and create a feedback loop of growth?
So then you will be, I guess you will have to grow your base of your audience to sort of to grow. That's the only lever.
Absolutely. And with the addition of every new customer comes volume, and with volume comes price decrease.
Yeah.
So over time our product should get cheaper. But additionally, once we get to a particular volume level of customers, we can change how we operate. So we go from white labeling existing products, which is okay in the first instance because the finance industry is very much a white labeled repackaged business, and that sort of works in our favor to start with. But long term, when we've got 1 million customers customers who all have car insurance. We can do all sorts of things. And if we have a banking license, let's say at that point, we can say, well, hang on a minute, banking for that particular type of customer is not particularly profitable anymore. Especially if we have a look at who's borrowing money for houses in the future, when maybe that's not going to be as accessible. That really changes the core banking business model. So there'll be a need to look at, what can we do with deposits? Well, if we've got people who have an aligned interest, they own a part of Maslow, they all have an interest in the cheapest possible financial product to solve a problem, which is what every single person who buys a financial product is interested in. It's not like buying a car where you pay more for leather seats and et cetera, et cetera. I have a problem, I want it to be solved, and I don't want to spend any more than I have to. That's pretty much the assessment criteria, and I have to be able to trust it. But if we have a look at what we can then do over time is start to build new products in different ways. And if we don't have the underlying incentive mismatch of carving out from our customer, we get to build really creative, fun products.
Amazing. And so you've built, you've got a great team around you. You're still in the early stages.
Yeah,
You've just raised funding.
Yeah, we just raised a small round on Virtual. As I said before, raising money is really difficult, especially with this cap. And we have to have the cap because we are trying to fix the extractive nature of the finance industry. Now, venture capital and startups are fairly extractive. The venture capital model is built on artificially propping up or growing companies, pouring money on this fire till it grows so big that the investors and founders can exit. And quite often that leaves not a lot of value left in a company. It's this sort of enshittification is a term that's being used at the moment. It's this notion of building up these companies to be worth something, extracting all the money and then just sort of leaving them there, right? It makes you step back from long-term value growth. It makes you step back from sustainable anything. When you're looking at how to acquire a customer and you've got all this money and you can just throw money at the problem. Anyone can acquire a customer if they have hundreds of millions of dollars to do it.
Yep.
And so it's extractive. And so we wanted to use, coming back to, we have to offer investors a return. We have to offer them something what's in it for me? You have to tick that box. So we say, hey, we're going to offer you a return. And yeah, we'll give you 200x and that should be enough for anyone.
Yes, it seems like it's a lot.
Yeah, and we will drop it as soon as we can because I believe it is way too high. And we won't be offering a 200x return to a $200 million round, but for a $5 million round, then, if that's what we have to offer to get the money in to build this, then who else is going to fund it otherwise,
And how do you shift from being owned by investors to being owned by
customers.
The customers.
Yeah, so we start off, we're already, our structure is we've got 95% of the company is owned privately at the moment and 5% is held by a trust, which is the Maslow Customer Trust. So we don't have any customers yet because we're pre-product, but it's set aside already. So customers will be entitled to one ownership share of that trust. And it doesn't matter whether there's 100 customers or 1 million. The 95% that we're selling to private investors has a cap on return. And so over time, as we pay out our investors, they're contractually obliged. In our constitution, it's part of their investment process. Once they hit 200x, they have to transfer their equity to the customer pool.
Back to the trust.
So it grows.
Interesting.
So at the moment, we're 95% private. Eventually, and we've actually got a mechanism as well, which is really interesting, to have 5% of the company that is always privately held. And we haven't used it yet. But we want to give that to charities or not-for-profits. So, similar to the way sort of IKEA is run or the way sort of Patagonia has been sort of gifted to a whole bunch of different organizations now. But eventually it'll be up to 95% customer owned, right? And so 95% of profit will be, the direction of that profit will be up to the customers.
Yeah, 100%. And so how have you gone about designing this whole system? Because your background's not necessarily in this. Obviously, you've surrounded yourself with other people. Yeah, talk us a little bit about that. Because is it from first principles kind of thing? So
when we launched our first fintech in 2014, we had a whole bunch of theories about how it would operate. And we were wrong. It went really well. We attracted a huge number of customers, but they weren't behaving how we thought they would. And so we did a bunch of research with those customers and we found out that they were paying us to feel safe. We'd inadvertently marketed a message that we were building a place, a community where they could come to, they could pay a monthly fee, and what they were doing was buying access to a place that would look out for their interests. We'd promised in our messaging that we would deliver more products later on. And they were paying to feel safe, but they weren't using our products. So we're actually extracting from them. And we had a business model that ran in conflict with them because I didn't know how problematic it was at the time. But what we learned, that's where we learned the need. And people were paying us for a safe place to do money. And there isn't one, right? At the moment, people make decisions on comparison sites where companies pay enormous amounts of money to be the first click, and they're getting financial advice from friends and families or influencers or podcasts or whatever. And this is a problem because one of the things people don't know is that whether it's She's on the Money, whether it's Flux Finance, whether it's whatever it is, if you want to make money out of these podcasts, if that is your business model, you sell places on them. And so $60,000 can be the price to get on one of these podcasts to talk about this new company that is a great, inverted commas, great opportunity for listeners. And this is a problem. So this is where we're getting advice. So we need a safe place to do money. And we learnt that from there. We had to build a business model that allowed us to have the relationship with customers that they'd told us they wanted. They wanted a safe place to do money, but we couldn't give that to them if our incentives ran in conflict with theirs.
Yep.
It just doesn't work. The logic fails. So we spent a lot of time trying to develop a model. We worked with some of the smartest people in the industry, and we couldn't come up with a model. Everything ran counter to the customer. Everything undermined the customer. Everything created this feedback loop of decay. And it was, sort of lots of butcher paper and whiteboard markers in a room with some smart people. And it got really frustrating. And I got really angry one night, and I just said, I threw a whole bunch of whiteboard markers at the wall. I said, fuck it, fuck this. I said, we can't do it. Let's just not make money out of financial products. Let's just operate them for good. And there was a sort of a seasoned industry guy in the room, and he looks at me and goes, hang on a minute, what does that mean? And I go, I don't know. And he goes, no, hang on a minute. And we spoke through this concept of what if you delink the revenue of a company from the financial product, and that's the magic. If you can sever that tie, you fundamentally change the motivations of the company, you change the characteristics of the industry, you change who it works for and why, and you change its currently extractive nature on society. And you can use it as a tool for collective growth. And if you think about what the finance industry used to be, it used to be a tool for dispersing and moving capital around. Now it's a tool for making capital. And it's a tool for making capital from people that don't have any capital. If you sell someone who doesn't have any money to pay their rent, a payday loan at 60%, next month they're going to have less. And that's your cycle, right? Let's change that. Let's change this notion of, hey, we don't want to make profit from selling someone a loan they cannot afford. And don't get me wrong, if we want to service the same types of needs that do frankly exist, and one of those is people who are high-risk borrowers need money. But what if you say, okay, sure, I still need to charge them a higher rate than someone who has heaps of cash in the bank and is a safe or has a higher credit rating? But what if I still don't try and make money off them? What if I just try and break even? What if that interest rate is a floating one that I can bring as low down by qualifying my lenders, et cetera, but not taking the margin? And then looking at all sorts of things, looking at insurance, looking at, hang on a minute, we've got, we spoke about Sharesies before. You've interviewed Brooke on here before. And, Stake is now, I think, the third largest share trading platform. And if we have a look at these companies, I'm not out here saying any of them are evil, right? But at the moment, these are founders using companies to build wealth for themselves and their investors, right? What if... And there's nothing wrong with that. I try and make a point these days as much as possible as saying I don't think it's evil trying to make money. I look at doing it in the finance industry where it's not just an industry, it's also a system. And so if, Stake's got 500,000 customers and they're all, buying and selling shares, and don't get me wrong, they've brought down the price. But if you were to say, hang on a minute, if Maslow built that platform and it was owned by those 500,000 users and that platform was built to deliver a service, not to extract or earn a revenue, then all of a sudden you can give investment access to people that might not otherwise have it. And you can also do something really exciting. And I don't know how this is going to work, but long term, one of the things that excites big thinkers most is this notion to say to a collective, hey, we can collectively pay a little bit more if we give access to certain kind of people, a certain kind of customer for a certain kind of product. And it might be that some people don't want to do that, but you can opt in. It might be that you can subsidize someone's, you might be able to help someone. You might be able to ask the community for help. There's all sorts of really interesting things we can do. And, there's some people have talked about, giving our customers like a rating, almost like a value rating. How valuable are they to the community? And there can be all types of different ways that you could earn that. And, people said, it sounds a little bit like the social rating system in China. And the fundamental difference is that there's nothing wrong with the social rating system if it's owned by everyone who uses it and it's decentralized, right? And this is where we come back to this decentralized methodology that really lines up with what we're doing. And, there's nothing wrong with any of these things if it's
implemented in the right way.
And no one person controls it. And so, this is why, so we talk about a cap on returns in Maslow. We have them as founders. So we have a cap on our returns. At some point in the future, we will get forced out of our equity position and I have to transfer my equity to the customers. And, if the customers want me to stay on as a staff member or an employee, that's fine. They can make that decision. But, everyone who invests in Maslow gets forced out, right? And we use this self-interest driver of, hey, I want to make money. Everyone wants to make money. Most people want to make money. How can we use that to build something and limit it? I say there's nothing actually wrong with capitalism. There's plenty wrong with unlimited capitalism. And I think in this hyper-connected, globalized world where everything...
we're capitalism on steroids at the moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so it sounds like the ambition is to be global, but starting initially in Australia and solving those problems here, kind of like a blueprint? Yeah,
look, Australia is probably the hardest place to operate a financial product, a retail financial product. It's one of the most regulated spaces. It's really interesting. There's a whole bunch of people have said, hey, you'll raise money for this in the US so easily. You'll raise money for this in Europe so easily. But, my support network and everything is in Australia. My, I guess, desire to fix the problem started here. And I want to fix it here first, or at least prove the model here. But, we've got a population of 26 million, so we don't have the volume we need to, we can be viable and, Upbank, we would like to follow Upbank's customer acquisition progress. So, 1 million customers in 5 years is sort of where they're tracking. We'd like to be able to achieve the same thing. Whether or not we can get the funding we need to do that is another question. But if we have a look at, in the US and the UK, we're starting to hear about some really interesting problems being solved with new concepts like, we've got impact investing on one side, we've got philanthropy on the other, but hang on a minute, now we've got impact philanthropy, right? And if we have a look at, in Australia, that's a really new concept. This notion that you can seek a return with your philanthropic funds to back organisations that are seeking to be self-sustainable or self-sufficient, which allows impact. You said before, you believe that business is the greatest force for good. And I believe that you have to couple the pursuit of profit or the pursuit of sustainability, viability to anything that you do if it's going to have longevity. And the problem with philanthropy and not-for-profits is they are completely dependent on the whims of those who donate to them. And whether it's government, whether it's, and we all know the story of we've had to shut down our work because we've lost funding. Well, if, we helped organisations become self-sufficient, they can deliver far more impact over time. We think once we prove this out in Australia, a couple of things will happen. Funding will be easier, but also, and we want to go to the US and Europe pretty quickly and do it quite aggressively. We will, if we prove this and validate this out, we will see competition, and we will see competition from the non-impact space. If you think about what we're doing, Costco for money is really the simple description, right? But it has to have, from our perspective, it has to have a purpose, and that purpose is to change the role of the finance industry and change who it benefits. And we think that will actually be our moat long term, as the world gets more and more unsustainable.
Amazing. And so what is the next step?
So we're actually so we raised not much, $400,000 on Virtual.
Yep.
Whilst we broke every one of their records except for funding metrics. We had some of the greatest conversion rates they've seen. No, the greatest conversion rates they've seen. It was an incredible campaign. We've got an enormous amount of validation on our cap table now. A lot of industry professionals. We were talking about one off air. Former chief of staff at Westpac and people in that same vein of really experienced operators who've seen the problems within the industry. So we're using that as a leapfrog into a larger round. One of the things we experienced trying to raise money before the virtual round, we've been working on Maslow for 4 years. So it came, lockdown in Melbourne is where we sort of really started it. And in many respects, 2 years in a room with nothing but your thoughts was a really great time and place to invest in the architecture and the system design of what Maslow is. And people who sort of peel back the hood, we don't sort of show everyone, but it is there obviously. And people who peel back the hood go, whoa, it does actually work. And we've had some really wonderful validation on that front. One of the things we were experiencing with investors was, no investor is a subject matter expert in each investment opportunity. They're generalists, they have to be, and they're usually really smart. They often have a background in the finance industry, funnily enough, because that's where wealth is, or where wealth is managed. Firstly, wealthy people, investors are wealthy, let's be realistic. They're in the upper percentage points, not the lower. And they couldn't identify the problem. So we don't think the finance industry is a problem. Well, okay, it is the biggest problem. Speaking of errors.
So if it ain't broke, don't...
Yeah, well, it's not broken for us.
Yeah. It's making us a lot of money.
Yeah,
so why would I...
Yeah, and I think there's a sense of...
there's almost a tension in investing in the solution because...
Yeah. And also I think, there's this sort of underlying bias that, if someone's getting a 60% payday loan, they're an idiot. It's their fault.
Yeah.
And that really steps back from some of the bigger problems that exist. And so they didn't understand the problem. They didn't understand the lived experiences of people without money. They didn't understand...
Or taking kind of your privilege as a financially literate person to actually help solve the problem.
Yeah, and I think people who have succeeded financially often look at other people who haven't as sort of, contributory to that problem. And don't get me wrong, sometimes they are. But, there are systems problems as well. And so they didn't understand the size of the problem. They didn't understand that we could use the finance industry as a tool. But one of the other things, they didn't have faith that we could execute on this. And to do that, we're three queer founders from outside the finance industry. And, having a team to execute on this is really hard. It's probably one of the biggest challenges I know of. And so we had to prove that we could execute and that we could attract support from the right people. So we did the virtual round to get that support, but we built a team of some of the industry's, best operators, leaders, former bank CEOs, et cetera, et cetera. So now what we've got is an opportunity or an offer that is, hey, whilst, fintech is unlike any other startup space. You can't just build a product and ship it and get validation. You've got to build a regulatory framework. And so it fundamentally changes the characteristics of investing in a fintech. So you can't just build a product and prove it and say, hey, it worked. So validation comes in a different sort of way.
It's not like an app.
Yeah. So I've got 322 people on my cap table now. And a good 200 of them are very senior finance industry people who've been in the industry for 20, 30 years, who have seen the problem, who think our solution can solve it, and who believe that we can do it. But also, they want to work for us, they want to support us. We've got inroads now with incredible potential partnerships and things like that. So now what we're doing is about to go to investors in the next couple of weeks and ask for a significant amount of money. Because $400,000 is not enough to build almost anything. It's certainly not enough to build a fintech.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing at the moment.
And what is the biggest challenge that you see?
Funding.
And is that piece in just trying to unlock and persuade people in the opportunity?
Everything in the finance industry, and let's be clear, the venture capital space is in the finance industry. A lot of VC money comes from superannuation, which is smack bang in the middle of the finance industry. Everything in the finance industry is designed around templates. Everything. Whether it's a mandate is a template that we will follow. Whether it's a pitch night, it's a template. Whether it's a web form to submit a template, a pitch deck is a template.
Yep.
Everything is a template. The moment you deviate from that, they get uncomfortable, and that's okay if they can see a return. That's okay if you've mitigated that risk on another in another perspective, or on the other hand. And that's where this credibility around industry backing was really important for us. But we have this cap on return, and a lot of impact companies start out being or wanting to be really impactful, and they lose direction. Mission deviation is a huge problem in social impact. And it happens because you're outside the template, and so people can't support you. And so you are pushed, pulled, and shoved back towards that template. And so if you have a look at the biggest problem we face, it's funding. And we built our constitution with mission lock, so we can't change it. So we will fail before we deviate. And I made that decision up front. I wanted to make that decision. I didn't want to be in a position where I could predicate our future on compromising our values. I would rather fail, this is too important, than to turn it into some profit-seeking, pump and dump scheme so that I can buy a holiday house. I have no interest in that. So that means we are stuck with our investment cap, and we are stuck with exiting to our customers. And, I think that's a good thing, but not all investors do. So it is a huge problem. And finding the people that don't have a mandate. There are a couple of them, but I really mean a couple, who have the agency to say, I have, and the resources to say that is a huge fucking problem and I want to solve it.
So are you hunting down sort of family offices and that
so we've got a list.
Different shaped VCs?
We've got a list. Look, there are no VCs on our list at the moment.
Yeah.
We had a VC try and have us deviate. When we launched our virtual round, we were approached. He wanted us to cancel the crowdfund, and he wanted us to step back from a bunch of things we were doing and change the quantum of the round and all sorts of stuff. And we said no. And I actually don't think any VCs are evil, and I know that they probably think I do. But who can back us? It's a really small group of people. And VCs have a mandate. They've raised money from people on their mandate. They can't deviate. You can't fault them for that. You can't call them evil because
this is our plan to make you money.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll invest in these types of companies.
You didn't invest so we could save the world. You invested so you could make money. And so we've got to find people who have got the ability to go rogue and say, I will give you $5 million to do this crazy thing that'll probably fail. But hey, if it doesn't, we might actually change the world. And
amazing.
Not many people do. Not many people change the world.
Well, not many people, I guess, have the luxury to be able to take a bet like that.
Absolutely. So it's a small group of people.
Yeah, interesting. This podcast is all about the mucky middle, about finding the balance between purpose and profit, and I guess threading that needle. So you were very uncompromising in that way. Are there certain things that you've had to sort of think about and figure out? Like originally, was it all about being totally customer owned, almost like a mutual?
It was always a compromise.
Yeah.
I've had to compromise on the cap, the investment cap.
Yep.
So it was 100x. And I thought that was too high then. And we had a very significant investor who we will be approaching again, and who has the ability to make that decision we were talking about, where they say, yeah, we're in. And they said it's not high enough. And I'm like, okay. And, so we increased it. And I won't increase it anymore. And I've promised myself that we won't raise too much money at that level, because the next round we'll reduce that cap down, and the next round it's a response to risk. And as we prove out our risk profile is lower, we'll reduce the return. But yeah, that was a compromise. But that's probably the only one. I've gone to zero for this and beyond. Had some incredible shareholders who just kept handing me money during COVID to not stop. And I should have stopped 2 years ago. But this is not just a company. People talk about, when will you stop? Like, at what point do you give up? And there is no answer to that. Like, it's just, I'm not giving up. And
it's your personal mission.
Yeah, I've put off having kids, which was a huge decision for my partner and I. Like, it's highly likely we will not have kids, and we really want kids. But the moment I have kids, my motivations will change. And all of a sudden, my world will be my kids. My world will not be protecting the world I see around me now. In the same way, I can't go to zero when I've got kids. I can't rent for life if I've got kids. I've got to build wealth for them.
Yeah.
And that is natural and normal. And this is why I don't try and punish anyone for trying to do this. Not everyone can make the decisions that I've made. And, you know, I'm sitting here getting goosebumps because they were hard. And they've been incredibly hard. But yeah, I just can't stop.
It's interesting. Yeah, I had 2 kids during COVID, and that sort of helped me focus on, I think, what was important. I mean, you know, we're a B Corp. We work with a lot of purpose-driven businesses, and you know, our mission is to create a world where the good companies reign supreme. So trying to help grow good businesses. But yeah, there's always compromises, and you're right. I can't take the risks that I could have without them, because the responsibility I feel to I exist for them now.
Yeah, your core responsibility is to your kids.
Yeah,
and you know it's quite interesting because whilst you know we've made the decisions that we have personally, you know my co-founder's got her first. Her daughter's 18 months old now, and you know I'm lucky. I've known my co-founder for 30 years. We're incredibly close. And I'm able to play a really, you know, strong role in her daughter's life, and that's amazing. We did our first solo babysitting on Sunday, and we didn't kill her, so it was great. But if we have a look at the people who we get most of our support from, they almost always have kids, and there's something in that. And you will know, like anyone who's had kids, the moment you have them, your fear of the world and your fear of what the world will look like.
Your just consciousness just changes, I think.
And that's why we get so much support from people with kids.
Yeah, interesting.
What world are we leaving them?
Yeah, I'm part of a group of you know, Parents for Climate Action, and there's a lot of that kind of people talk about that snap of suddenly, you know, these were not things that I was thinking about, and suddenly I changed my diet, I changed my energy, I did, you know, changed my super, all of these things to sort of make sure that their children had a place to exist in.
One of my favourite people in the startup space, one of my favourite people, Vinko Gergic. He works at Aussie Angels now. Vinko and I have known each other a long time. He reached out when he saw what we were doing. And he invested in our virtual round. He actually almost became one of our co-founders, which is another story in itself. But he wrote us a quote, a reason for why he invested. And he said, I'm investing in Maslow for a world that I can leave my children. And, you know, he talks about how, you know, when the world is failing and, you know, he doesn't want to be in a position where he says, I could have maybe done something about that. And, you know, as I said before, you know, Aaron Sahan has said on record publicly that nothing else we do to fix the world matters unless we fix the finance industry.
So next step, get the funding, build this industry.
Build the product that we've got. We've got all the partnerships, right?
Yeah,
so
you've got the partnerships. You've got fairly influential people that are backing you. You're ready to go.
We just need money.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this, get your wallet out.
If you're listening to this and you've got $5 million and you want to change the world, and you understand that sometimes the biggest impact comes from backing a viable, self-sufficient business that, yes, will make a lot of money for you, but then return that back to this circularity economy that we need, then reach out.
Awesome. And Kane, I guess you seem to have unlimited reserves of energy. Like you're really driven in this. Do you struggle? Like you know, sometimes I get to the end of my tether and I'm like, I'm not making enough of a difference. I'm not. How do you find those reserves and keep? Because as a CEO, you also have to be kind of always the front of the coal face. You got to be kind of the face of the business. Well, how do you find that?
There's no hiding. Or there's no escaping that the past 4 years have been the hardest years of my life. I can't tell you about sleepless nights, like, you know, and I went to zero. And when I say going to zero, I mean, like, I was existing on my partner's wage, who is a state school secondary teacher, a high school teacher. He was working extra work after hours to pay our rent. I haven't had a holiday in 4 years. I got to the point where I needed t-shirts because I was wearing holes in my t-shirts and I couldn't afford to buy a t-shirt. I couldn't afford to go out for dinner with my friends. I became, you know, we talk about Melbourne's lockdown. People left Melbourne's lockdown in 2022, 2023. I didn't. There were a few nights where I'd sort of tap my partner on the shoulder and I'd say, do I need to stop?
Mm.
And he would say to me, no. And that's, it's an incredible position to be in. And to have a partner who never once complained, never once made me wear the fact that he was wearing my decisions. Yeah. Unbelievable amount of support. And, you know, the people around me, this mission attracts people like that. That's support. And that's how I can keep going.
Amazing. What advice would you give to other people thinking about starting a business?
I think being honest about your ideas. I'm a big fan of shooting holes in things before you take them to other people, and I'm relatively self-aware, and not everyone is. So many lies get told in business by people to other people, by people to themselves, and I think, again, coming back to efficiency, it's so wildly inefficient. So if you do want to get into business, you need to be honest about, you know, and people talk about being honest in business as in being honest with, you know, what you're doing and what you're selling. I actually mean with yourself and with what, you know, your ideas, sanity check them, ask people that hate you what they think of your idea. Like, seriously, you know, that's my advice for people, is just constantly, you need to find people that can find the flaws in what you're building, listen to them, make sure those flaws are responded to or, you know, changed, or don't move forward. You know, so many people pitch things and I look at it and go, that will never work. Why are you pitching it? You should be able to see that. And, you know,
or you haven't spoken to anyone about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or you use the glaring gaps and you say, what about this? And they go, oh, well, we don't really know. And I go, well,
we've got to figure that a bit out.
You should probably figure that out. And you can't figure out everything, and not everything's predictable and plannable and all those sorts of things. But a lot of things, you just go, that'll never work. So yeah, no, if you're going to get into business, I think you need to be honest with everyone, but mostly with yourself about your opportunities.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I guess finally, before we sort of wrap up, you know, what advice would you give your younger self? What is that thing, if you could sort of look back at the beginning of, you know, when you were just starting Maslow, what would you say to yourself?
I would say stop trying to be who they want you to be. Is probably what I would say. And I would say that to my younger self going back many years. I have good gut instincts. I make good judgment calls. And I think I've learnt as I've got older that not everyone does. And I think everyone learns as we become adults that the people that have the position or are in positions to make decisions, we assume as kids that they are good at making those decisions, or they are qualified to make those decisions. And I think that, you know, the older I've got, the more I've learnt that they're not. And they're just as fallible as all of us, and that no one knows what we're doing.
Yeah, we're all just figuring it out.
Yeah.
Amazing, Kane. Thank you so much for joining us in the Mucky Metal.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Mucky Metal. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I enjoyed having the conversation. If you did, please hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts, and if you feel so inclined, give us a review. It really helps other people discover the show and gives me a little dopamine hit as well. If you'd like to get in touch, you can find me on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at nick@papermoose.com.
The Mucky Middle is a Paper Moose production. Music by Caleb Jacobs.